you to learn what these networks are trying to do to you. It's not it's not really a source of news about your friends. It's not what your friends are saying. It's what the network wants to see, and that what the algorithm really wants you to see.
Mm-hmm.
And that.
Sorry, Samir from Tweepsmap. Great to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, as we were talking about before we jumped in, this is a third podcast of the day, and I'm looking forward to jumping in right in with you. You're building an analytics system that exists on top of social media, right? That gives people feedback on what their messaging is about, but also how to the best times or the best places to tweet or send a message out. So this is mostly built on top of Twitter. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes. So it's mostly built on Twitter. We do support LinkedIn and Instagram only for publishing. LinkedIn and Facebook only for publishing. But we're currently working on adding other analytics for other social networks to be more comprehensive. But it's the biggest advantage we have is with our advanced Twitter analytics.
Definitely. So let's talk about that. What is the value in having some analytics from Twitter? Like, what can you learn from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tweepsmap helps businesses build a personalized relationship with their social media audience. So, and usually, generally, social media analytics is very basic and very bland. So they tell you how many likes you get, how many shares you get, and things like that. What we do is a little bit different. We give you a depth that helps you build a personal relationship. So you'd be able to understand what your audience likes to talk about, when do they go online, and what is the right message that helps you get higher engagement with them and build a more personalized relationship if you really understand who your target audience is. Mm-hmm. So that basically results in higher conversions, higher engagement with your audience, and then better brand recognition.
Cool. So, I mean, social media has been around for like a decade or two now, right? Most platforms. There's been a variety of services built around them. Why the need to build an analytics engine on top of Twitter?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. So, like historically, Tweepsmap for me was not really a company. It started as a fun project, like probably most most founders do.
Yeah.
So I was working on a different startup. And basically, I just thought, I like to tinker and build mobile apps and things like that, not just for business, but for fun as well. So I built something. I saw someone was trying to build some location of Twitter followers. I thought, this is really very poorly done. I could do something better. So I built something with a combination of AI because Twitter is different. Unlike Facebook, when you go on Facebook, you go and tell Facebook, I'm a 30-year-old male who lives in Toronto who works in this field. Twitter, on the other hand, is different. It doesn't ask you for these things. You just go and put a bio about yourself, and maybe you put a location. So that's what required really more advanced deciphering of what people mean when they say on Twitter itself. So that's when I went and I built some algorithm that uses AI to decipher what people really mean, and then create a map that that maps out your Twitter followers. And that was a big hit back in 2011. Everyone loved it, and it had like a wild ride. It was all over the internet, and but for me, it wasn't a company. It was just a fun project that I built in the basement. So fast forward a few years down the road, after many years of having that app available for everyone to use, I got a lot of contact by larger brands trying to do more than what the tool was giving them. And then since there's also not that many available tools out there to give you more advanced analytics, so at some point after a few years of that, I decided I need to actually spend the effort and make it a business, and then build something that all these businesses to give them what they're asking for.
That's interesting. I like that. So you started as a personal project, and it took a life of its own, and you actually built an organic audience. I mean, user base who wanted more from it. and
Yes.
you took it into a business. I mean, that's the ideal for any kind of like founder, right? You build something to solve a personal problem, and it kind of spirals into other people's problems, to solve other people's problems.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean that's the most exciting thing about, like, when you're a founder or even a tinker who just likes to build things, is to see so many people use what you're building and then get the satisfaction is like, oh, I actually built something that's used by so many people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so initially, initially I thought I have a whole bunch of other apps that are also popular, but I just never found a business case for them. But that one really, um, the larger brand requesting specific solutions to problems they have really has triggered the need for me to think, okay, yeah, this actually does scale to be a business that helps other businesses. So yeah, that's what really got it up the ground.
No, absolutely. My co-founder Henry, he talked to me about this. It's like the difference between innovation and invention, and even tinkers and all the other aspects, right? So innovation happens when you take an invention and you commercialize it. So
Yeah.
invention plus commercialization, the development of IP, but commercialized. So people who pay for it to actually the invention actually the IP goes out and solve that real problems and enough to pay for it. We put that together. That's what the formula is to get an innovation, something that changes the way people do things.
Yeah, that's a
And
great definition for it. Yeah.
yeah, and that's it. And the main difference between that and like tinkerers, people who like tinker, like you think about people in the like back in the day in their basement garages, just like building things for fun, improving on things, is that if they don't commercialize, it doesn't become an innovation. It doesn't change the way we do things, right?
Yeah.
Innovation happens in three things: product, service, or a process. With yours, what do you see this? What are the main problems that you're solving here?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of problems that businesses usually face, which is, I mean, what do people mean when they say certain things on social media? Um, I mean, a location was an example I give. So, for some people say, I live in I live in the Big Apple, or they mention the Big Apple, but are they really talking about New York City, or are they talking, the Big Apple restaurant on the 401, right? I mean, it
Mm,
could have different meaning, or they could say, I live in the six, which is like, that's a very Toronto lingo, right? You need to
yeah.
understand what that means to
Mm,
say, okay, the six, that means it's from Toronto. Or it could say, or it could be more complicated examples. It could be, I live in London, but is that London, Ontario, or London, UK? So there is more complicated examples. So there is all these things that we say and do on social media would have different meanings.
mm,
And um, and then for a business, it needs to actually get with higher certainty and understanding of that data, what it really means. So location is, for example, a good example. It could be another example, could be, what time of the day people go online, what time of the day your audience goes online. So that's another problem usually businesses face, especially when they're publishing on social media, because they want to actually publish something when their audience is active.
mm,
Um, but also, um, yeah, but it's not just all your audience has to be online at a certain time. So if you're an international brand, you might have audience in Australia that goes online at a different time. And if you continuously focus on your global audience, you might be missing a significant segment of your audience that goes online at a different time of the day. So that way, maybe you need to target them, and you need to target them also with the right message. So
mm.
things that might be engaging North America might not be engaging in Australia. So you need to actually pick the right messages for the right audience and get higher engagement with that specific audience. So that's another example. Another another thing that would be useful for a brand is how do they, find a specific segment that you want to reach out to. For example, I'm a business, I'm having a conference, well, maybe not in COVID time, maybe when COVID is over,
Mhm.
having a conference in San Francisco. And I want to reach out to, let's say, CEOs, or I don't know, software developers who are in our audience in San Francisco, and tell them that there's a conference that is happening in San Francisco so they know about it and come over and meet us. So that's where also our tool comes in handy. Is we actually narrow it down. We tell you, if we basically, you just ask us questions. What do you need to do? You need to find people who are CEOs in San Francisco, and we tell you, here are the people. Now reach out to them with a message. So it solves you know, I always say we don't solve one problem, we answer questions. What are the business? Usually a marketer has a lot of questions and they need to get an answer for them, and we help them answer those questions. So we might not solve everything, and we might not be the tool that you will use everything, every different segment of our service, but we try to answer basically most of the questions that you have.
Yeah. I mean, that seems interesting. Like, using data to build analytics out of it to answer particular, subset of questions that businesses might have about their audiences, about their clients, about people who are maybe following them online. I personally got really into the idea of like sentiment analysis, trying to figure out how people feel about certain things. And Twitter was one of the first platforms to allow for this, right? Because there's so much qualitative information you can get. So I remember like, even way back, like 2013, 2014, people were pulling, a large data sets of tweets out, and they were creating like sentiment analysis, how certain people feel throughout the day or about what they tweet, and like trying to pull these information maps out, right? And just like you make a heat map of like, where people are during a certain time, you can kind of map out how, certain subsets of the population feel during the time, right? And I always thought that was like mystical. That's fucking magic, right? Like imagine being able to like know that just seemed like so to me at that time, especially. I'm like, yo, this doesn't make any sense. Like how accurate could it be? Like how do you take just like a few words, like a limited tweet, and like be able to pull how people feel out of that, right? Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, do you have any?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, we do have sentiment analysis, and I'll confess our sentiment analysis is not really in-house built. So we use off-the-shelf packages, mostly because that thing has become more bread and butter kind of thing. There is nothing really special about it. I mean, it's not highly accurate when it comes to sentiment analysis, mostly because sometimes there are certain things that get lost in translation. Like you could have a sarcastic tone when you actually just without saying you're sarcastic. So you need to know who the person is saying it. So there's all these things. There's context that is always missing when you just parse words, and unfortunately, that's one of the downside in social media analytics is that a lot of the times there's context is missing. So it's not going to be 100% accurate, but it will be highly accurate, I would say, to give you, if you look at it from the grand scheme of things, not everyone is sarcastic. There's only very few people who are usually sarcastic when they say certain things. So it will be more than 90% accurate. So that really helps you make a judgment call about, the general sentiment of a certain topic. But it's not really gonna, if you drill down to the individual piece of content, to the tweet itself, it would not be very accurate. So now taking a step back, so when we talk about our own algorithm, we try to make them higher than usual accurate. And that's why I said, like, for example, when people say I live in the Big Apple, it is important to know when that person says they live in the Big Apple, if they're actually in the United States, or it's just, or maybe they just like to say I live in the Big Apple when they don't live in the United States. So that's where our AI comes into play. We're actually trying to understand the context around what people say, and then try to pull that information and then make it and try to judge the relevancy of that context and see, is that what you said? What is the confidence? What is our confidence in determining, whether that person is, gender male or female, or whether that person is living that location, or that person works in IT? We try to have a certain level of confidence and then show our end users, the businesses, that stat, and then we use it in two different ways. So one way would be, for example, if you're trying to get a global statistics about social media, about your own account, your audience, or a specific topic, and trying to measure, we give you the stats even when we don't have very high confidence, because basically at that point you're only interested in measuring, gauging what's happening, or getting the high level information, demographic be it, or sentiment. But when you go and try to narrow down, so like I want to reach out to CEOs who live in California, that information we actually we only show you that piece of information when we have really high confidence in our accuracy of our algorithms. So then because you're going to go one-on-one and actually talk to the people, you don't want to end up talking to someone who is really not matching what your criteria you're looking for. So there's sort of two levels of ways how we present the data and we process it, which reflects the accuracy of the data, like you were saying earlier. Because sentiment, it's not always like, some things could be lost in the translation. So the confidence level will determine how you're engaging with that audience.
Yeah. So at what point does this level of data and this level of analytics become scary? Right. At what point does it become intrusive into, our, I guess into our personal security?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. So one of the things that we're really careful about is not to mix private data with public data. So in terms of Twitter, the vast majority of the Twitter data is public. So, if you say something on Twitter, people will find it. So that's the important element, is that only a small number of accounts are private on Twitter, but we make sure that data is not really crosses the public domain, or so it's not searchable. If that account is private or tweets something that is private, it is private. People cannot find it outside of that domain. So we only limit our experiences to public, and then the other piece of information is that other networks, say Facebook or Instagram and LinkedIn, they also have separation of what's private and what's public. So we also don't merge those. We don't merge your personalities across. So if you say something on Twitter, we're not gonna say, oh, but this person is this person on Facebook and they also said that. So that also, because even though there are silos, but we try to keep the silos separated, so that way you don't crisscross. If you say something on Twitter and you're on Twitter, I mean, that's a fair game. People can see what you're saying on Twitter. You're doing it publicly, but we don't cross the networks across.
That's interesting. Well, I really wanted to discuss with you something that's very recent in the news. Are you familiar with Parler, the conservative app?
Yes.
So Parler made news, I think, yesterday. They are, of course, because of their audience base and what happened in the U.S. Capitol, they got pulled out of the App Store and the App Store and the Play Store, Google and Apple, and then Amazon chimed in, and the Parler is hosted on Amazon. And for those who don't know, it's a social media app aimed at a conservative right-wing audience base. And when Amazon was able to pull it out, there's a group called the Internet Archive. They're really good at archiving the internet, especially parts of it that are going to be deleted or go obsolete. They were really well known for pulling the information out of GeoCities and preserving GeoCities when it was being deleted by Yahoo. Them, but also a variety of other groups went into Parler and started pulling data out of it in order to preserve it, but also to capture it. And to their surprise, there's very little security protections involved in Parler. One of the main things Parler did was each post was sourced by number, so it's very easy just by URL to search posts. So even just from that aspect, people are able to pull data dump millions of posts out of Parler. But more than that, they were able to pull out usernames, user information, metadata about where the posts were posted, like geographically where the posts came from, what phones they came out of. They would pull out tons of information. And now the app is as dead. There's this huge data pool now available, and these data people are cross-sourcing it and going through it all. And so one of the main interests is one, the lack of security in an app like that is terrible, but two, the data behind this, for someone who's really into analytics and understanding people, this gives a really good lens into a very niche subset of people. Yeah. Have you yourself run across this data, or have you heard much about this?
Yeah, so I have heard about all these things. Unfortunately, we don't really get involved into that area. So I mean, Parler is similar. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Gab. So Gab was before Parler, sort of similar, but Gap didn't really take off and had very similar problems to what Parler is facing now is probably exactly the same thing what happened to Gap. They were also having hate speech. They were also having violent threats, and then they were pulled out from the platforms. And I believe they were also on Amazon, and Amazon kicked them out. And then they moved on to another host, and that host also kicked them out. So it's a similar story. We try to stay away from it mostly because monetizing negativity was never really a thing that we want to do. And I mean, even now, even with us on Twitter, sometimes we just publish story like, Twitter suspended this account or Twitter did that account, and you would see the backlash with our own followers. We have a significant followers on Twitter for 370,000 followers. So even with those stories, which are general mainstream, we get a lot of backlash from people, pro and con, and it's usually, so we try to stay out of the political sphere really, and we try to focus on the business side of social media, because I think that it has a more lasting impact than politics. Politics, comes and goes, and then one day, 4 years, some guy was president, and now he's no longer president anymore. So it shifts, and then if you end up on one side or the other, and then there's backlashes and there's PR nightmares, etc. So that's my view on why we're not really touching that data. I could imagine if I was like a security researcher or into like law enforcement, that data would be very interesting just from that aspect alone. And I know that there's a UFT researcher who's really identifying some of the rioters that entered the Capitol Hill by using that data, and he's by using photos and information and from pulled from all over the place to actually identify, and he's managed to identify quite a few people already. So that's in terms of the data. Now, the terms of in terms of security, I mean, it's unfortunate, but I would say the vast majority of software developers these days don't care about security. That's one of the challenges. Like, I've seen banking apps that really have terrible security. Even banking websites. I think all the major Canadian banks don't have really good security for online banking. And I've even contacted, like, I found security holes and contacted their CTOs. At one point, the CTO said, oh, well, we have, their response is, well, the worst thing that happens if somebody hacks into your account, we guarantee that we will give you your money back or something. But I'm like, but that's not really, that shouldn't be the default, that you have a money back guarantee if you're hacked. It should be, you should have a secure system first. And then they said, well, we have an audit. We have a third company that does audit to our software, and they audited in the past. But I'm like, well, we do social media analytics, and our service is more secure than your bank. And then that's not that is not really a secure thing. I mean, what is the worst thing that can happen when somebody hacks a social media analytics company, right? I mean, they're not gonna get your money or anything. It's not like we're a target or anything. But our security, we spend a lot of effort into our security than a bank. I think that's become scary. So that brings up your point, is that these apps, a lot of the times they rush into building them without having someone who's senior with a security knowledge or with background. I just maybe someone who just graduated from school and started coding, and they start coding and they build something, and it's nice and fun, but nobody thought about security. And then all of a sudden it would be like, the LinkedIn story where they have all the passwords stored in plain text, not even encrypted, not even hashed. So I mean, that's unfortunate in today's world, but it's more common than what you think.
Absolutely, and especially as development becomes more open and more people are getting into it. Like, there's a lot of best practices that are lost.
Yeah.
I myself, I'm taking a lot of courses right now online to learn programming. But I can imagine, I'm not gonna build, if I build something out commercially, there's a lot of best practices that I might miss out because I'm just learning the overall things of not a depth. Luckily for me, I have a team I can rely on. I have sources that I can double check, and I'm taking the effort to go into that. But a lot of people are just launching things without doing the due diligence, and I think that's scary in itself. But flipping back to social media and some of the changes we're seeing, right? Going back to social media as an industry, now in a second decade almost, basically a second decade and moving to the third, it's kind of evolving. The last 10 years is we've seen the emergence of these giant networks, right? Unlike we've seen anything before, mostly because of mobile phones, right? 1.6 million devices, 1.6 billion devices, 1.6 billion people connected through mobile devices.
Yeah.
I think 5 billion devices currently in the market, and allows for a large pool of people who can just get internet work together. But we're seeing a kind of division, right? So not one within the large platforms, the algorithms are dividing people into like-minded groups, right? That's one of the main reasons we're seeing the extremist kind of absurdance right now is that the social media followers, whatever you believe, you get to tend to match with other people who believe the same thing, and these pools of like-mindedness are kind of developing, right? Some of them are beneficial, and it puts you in a group of people that are in the same kind of mindset or trajectory as you. But other times can be negative, where it can be it can put you with people who believe in the same kind of negative thoughts or ideas as you, and suddenly you become packeted together as a community. And we're seeing the main platforms still exist, but small niche categories. Parler is one of the extreme examples of this, but there's other ones there's sales professional communities that are developing. There are apps that are built for certain professionals or certain people with certain skills or certain level of communities. Smaller niche communities are developing where it's focused on a very small but very tight-wound community, right? We're seeing social networks like that kind of develop, because people are now getting used to it, right? I think just 2-3 years ago, the average person was on about 6 different social networks. Now it's become more, right? You have the main networks you're on. Each network, you have a personality that you show that's a little different. Your Instagram personality is different than your Twitter one, that's different from your LinkedIn one. People are becoming multifaceted, different sides of themselves. It's like you would show a different personality at work versus at home, versus when you're in your dating life, right? You have these different kind of parts of yourself they show differently. People have got to become adept at doing that online, right? What I'm interested in is what is human behavior morph into, right? Into the virtual sphere. What are you seeing, especially being an analytics-based firm? You see any patterns?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think what you described is very accurate, and maybe for us here in North America, we haven't really seen it until recently. We haven't seen it materialize in such a way. I remember back in the early 2011, 2012, there was the Arab Spring, and that really started on social media. And that was at first it was a positive event, that there was all these people rising against dictatorships and organizing, etc. But at the same time, there was negative groups, so all these terror groups seized on the opportunity and used the same tactics, the same ideas, and started growing these networks, these vast networks on social media. And be it some of it was on Facebook, but I think the majority of it was on Twitter, mostly because it was public, and that really spread like wildfire. And at the time, I think all these social media companies didn't know what to make of it. They just thought, oh, there's all these users that are using it and not really paying attention. But until the extreme violence that came of it, and nothing would happen here in North America compared to any of the violence that happened in the Middle East with these extremist group, and they really used social media for a really bad cause. And at that point, they started to social media. I think Twitter and Facebook took them a few years before they realized, oh, what have we created here? We created a monster. So they started cracking down on these extremist group and their network. But it was a game of whack-a-mole. They kept shutting things down, and then they show up in another place, and then those groups learned how to adapt to go around all these crackdowns. But eventually, I think they got it right. They started to build more algorithms, and unfortunately, we normal people started to get impacted by these algorithms. A lot of us you probably have it with your own social media. Sometimes you get locked out of your account and they tell you, oh, you need to verify or do something. Or sometimes they suspend you for a few days because they think you're doing suspicious behavior. But that's not really a person doing that. It's an algorithm trying to combat all those extremist groups that are doing all these actions on social media. So yeah, so then once that happened, those extremist groups splintered into different platforms, and then they went into other social networks that are not really mainstream networks that we use today. And some of them went into, like Telegram, which is now making a comeback. Some of them went into, other groups. So that was basically that happened back 5 years ago. And it seems like now it's repeating itself, but more so in North America. So the same thing happened here. There's a lot of people here with extremist views started to use social media in general, the bigger social media, and then started to grow out of that into using it for not always for good. And then the social networks cracked down, and then the same people went and splintered into other apps and networks and trying to go and do it. So that's in terms of, to address that point. But in terms of just the general behavior of people, I think it's actually it's been happening for a while. Like there is a lot of apps. So for example, my wife used a neighborhood app that is a social network just for our own neighborhood. And basically talking about, some event happening in the neighborhood, or somebody's car was stolen, or someone lost a pet. And so that's a a sort of a geographic bound social network that's really limited to our own neighborhood. Other apps, and I think Facebook is, I wanted to mention that Facebook has really recognized that a long time ago. And if you notice that if you now post something on Facebook as a brand, nobody will see your post. If you post something on Facebook to your friend, only a handful of your friends will see your post. But try to post something on a group, and then you will see it really blows up. That's mostly because Facebook has really highly been focusing on groups rather than the normal social media, because they think that's where people will go eventually. Everyone will want to only read news about read about that specific topic, because you're in that mood. You switch into that mood, and that's what you're reading. And funny thing is, that's how I also use Twitter. I actually don't read my feed at all. I don't read my Twitter timeline. I segment my Twitter into lists. So I have, like, say for example, a finance list. I have a technology list. I have a COVID list. So when I want to read about something, so I'm like, oh, I'm hearing something about COVID today. Oh, I don't actually even go to the web. I just go to my Twitter account. I go into my COVID list, because I have a list of experts that I've put in it, and I only read the news from them, and it's usually much faster than any other news that you read of. So I think that's really the future. We'll all, whether it will be different apps that people will go and use, or it could be just within those silos, within those larger social networks themselves, where people will just go and form groups and try to interact with each other within that group. Because I think social media for everyone is losing its appeal for the average person. It's becoming too vast, and there's just too much noise to analyze. And I think that's also true for analytics companies, is that we're trying to help brands to sort of decipher that segment and trying to focus only on subsets of groups, as opposed to just social media in general, because that's really also not helpful to brands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. So as I mentioned before, we started, like, I'm not a big user of Twitter. Like we have a Twitter account, but we're not that big on it. I found myself more drawn to Instagram. Mostly that's where my friends were, and that's what I got used to. As a social network, professionally, LinkedIn, Facebook, again, just like you mentioned, mostly the groups that I'm in my neighborhood group. I'm in a few groups. I love the Facebook Marketplace, but barely use it as a network anymore. But Twitter, there was a time where I got into Twitter, again, not for tweeting. I was never big on tweeting, but Twitter as an information source is so surreal, right? I wasn't familiar with the list feature, but now that you say it, I think I'm more engaged with it. So back in 2013, 2014, when I was in the innovation space in Toronto, was so new. there wasn't much information about how to know what's happening. Like most social events, most of the meetups, all those kind of things were kind of so spread in so many different like platforms and mediums that you couldn't coalesce it. But Twitter, if you follow the right people, you can like it'll like curate almost like this community for you of like information based off of
Yeah.
who you follow. So it was very easy for me to suddenly get information about the innovation, larger innovation industry, just by just following all the major people on there, right? And you now suddenly have like the mind, like the mindsets and things they talk about and the events they retweet about and stuff, and you suddenly have a whole thing, like a whole like idea of everything that's going on. So Twitter is really interesting as an education tool, like like by educating yourself about a certain topic by following people. And I think that that's the main thing that social media has changed in our zeitgeist, right? Is that we've gone from trusting institutions, brands, to trusting people as
Yeah.
individuals, right? People will follow not just a newspaper anymore, but a journalist. People won't just want to go to a university anymore. They want a particular professor, right?
Yeah.
So there's this leverage of giving knowledge and power to the people. I think that's what's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Twitter, I don't remember, it was 5 or 6 years when you used to go to Twitter, they used to call themselves we're a social network. But if I think 5 or 6 years ago they made the change. If you go to twitter.com, they will tell you, we're a source of real-time news. Where it's actually you will learn what's happening. So it's not really a social network anymore. It's really more about a source of news, and that's where they're trying to make the shift. Um, and you're absolutely right. I think it is much faster and more efficient way to learn about what's happening. It will take sometimes several hours for something, a news article or an event to be published on a website, and then you don't even know where it is. It's hard to find it. But if you go to Twitter and if you're following the right people, then you will actually see it right there within a couple of seconds. And like I said, like I think it's if you use the Twitter list to your advantage, you will actually you will curate the topics that you really care about, and then you will strip out the noise. So like, I mean, why would you read about politics if you're only interested about technology? So if you're only interested in technology, you just go to your technology list and just read what people are saying. There's an Apple event. These are the Apple expert that you put in that group, mostly because you thought of them, they're expert, and then you want to see what their opinion is, as opposed to listening to a news organization or a company. You want to hear from these people specifically. And I think that's really how I use Twitter myself. I think it makes a night and day, and a lot of people get turned off. And I don't know, unfortunately, I don't know why Twitter doesn't really push that list function. It's really long overdue. I think if people see how that is used and notice it, they might actually tend to stay more on Twitter, because you're creating your own source of news yourself, the way you like it to hear it, as opposed to having a lot of noise coming at you. So so I mean that's an interesting way of looking at the data.
No, I think have you? So I want to switch the conversation a little bit more to a little more about like the plurality, like the back and forth between these networks and humans, right? Like what drives what? Like a lot of the lead, a lot of the programmers, a lot of the knowledge workers in these networks talk about how they no longer have control of the algorithm. No one person knows what's happening, right? Like the algorithms have been built to like have a mind of its own, and it's enforcing user behavior in the interest of the network, right? Now it's become part of our everyday knowledge that like if you're not paying for a service, you are the product, right? They're productizing you, and that's what these social networks are now doing, right? They're trying to suck in your attention, bring you, get you to involved just so they can sell you ad. One of the main reasons Facebook has negative connotation is it's overly advertising is overly done there. But morphing into like what these social networks are becoming. Have you watched The Social Network on Netflix?
I have, yes.
The Social Dilemma, sorry.
Yes,
The Social Dilemma.
yes. Yeah, it's very good. I know what you're talking about. And actually, I let my teenage daughter watch it with us as well. So I said it's very important for you to learn what these networks are trying to do to you. It's not it's not really a source of news about your friends. It's not what your friends are saying. It's what the network wants to see, and that what the algorithm really wants you to see.
Hmm.
And that's it's unfortunate. I mean, I really don't like it. One of the things that turned me off from Facebook is their algorithm, because when I go to Facebook and I log in, I don't really see posts from my friends. I see posts from, you know, mostly acquaintances that either have negative, like extreme negative or extreme positive engagement, and then they just show up in my feed. And I'm like, where are my friends? And I think my friends are not on Facebook, but they actually are on Facebook and they are posting on Facebook. I just don't see their posts, mostly because they're posting about their kids or they're posting about their life, which doesn't generate, an extreme negative or positive reaction. And that why you don't see that. So the what started as a social network, it really became a feed of algorithms that all they want is monetization. And the same thing with Twitter. Twitter was unfortunately also used to focus on reverse chronological timeline. So whatever people you follow, you will see on their feed. And that has also changed, I think 4 or 5 years ago, but they gave you the option to turn it off so you can go back and see the real feed. And they've redone Twitter again, and then now you can turn it off, but it turns off only for the session. So if you log in again, if you leave your computer, close your browser, come back again, it reverts back to their algorithm so they can make more ad money. And I'm gonna push the list again here. The lists don't have an algorithm. The list, you see it like it goes. So that's one reason I don't really read my feed. It's really an algorithm, just like Facebook algorithm. It's not really the feed of what I want to read. It's a feed of what the algorithm wants me to read. So I just go onto the list. And the same thing with groups. Facebook groups was also reverse chronological, so it was also showing you relevant information. But somehow, unfortunately, that has also, I don't remember what it was last year. They also switched it to be more algorithm based. So you don't see the most recent post first. You will see whatever the algorithm decides they want you to see. And although that's not ad driven, because I don't believe there's ads still in Facebook groups, but I think it seems like that's where they're going to be heading at some point. They want you to be addicted to groups, and then they start to push ads, and it loses its benefit.
Yeah, it's the saddest thing about like the ad model. Like once like a business been addicted to the ad model, it seems like it gets overly consumed by it and leads to discretion. Is the destruction, because people become overly productized, right? You're bombarded by ads, especially the ones that follow you. People talk about the creepiness of these social networks, where you go scroll to the screen and almost every ad seems targeted about stuff you've recently talked about.
Yeah.
Right. Facebook got a lot of slack, Facebook and Instagram and even TikTok, because they have found a way to route to the chip of your phone. So almost all phones now have a voice assistant, and the voice assistant has like a native keyword search. So it's always on. I was always listening for the keyword to get triggered. So it logs keywords it hears when you're talking. Every time you're talking, your phone's listening. If you have smart home devices, it's listening, and it's listening for the keyword search. That's what they say, but they're also logging keywords. And certain apps have been able to now to root into that file directory, that root file where those keywords are logged, and pull it out and use it now to show you native advertising that's more relevant to things you're talking about. So people have seen so much. They talk about something, they open up the social app, and boom, there's an ad for what they just talked about there. And rather than being convenient, it's seen as super creepy and invasive, and it's ruining our relationship, our trust vector with our devices. And what I'm really interested in is how we modify this, because these algorithms are really intelligent and are really useful if you think about it, right? Like I like the idea of a machine curating things to me based off what I like, but I just don't like it listening and creepily and doing it in a subversive manner, right?
Yeah.
Like if there's a way for us to share data and like to have have a better control of it, like this is my data pool, right? And I'm letting you machine, aka access it. It's a give and take. I give data, you give me intelligence to that data,
Yeah.
right? I think people are being like, are treated as a product too much. Whereas if we change the relationship just a little bit, right? Change if you flip the relationship, people will be actually more willing to provide even more data, right? If they're seen they're given more control over it. And one of the projects that I'm really following is Tim Berners-Lee, the founder of the HTML, founder of the modern web, right? He's actually working on another project based off this, right? So it's a project called Solid. It's open source, just like the web was, right? It's coming out of the CERN, Center for European Research, basically the whole project is about how do we decouple data from apps, right? So the platform goes, it's like a backend system where data can be stored in pods. The pods is owned by the user, and what it does is the user is giving permission to the app to use to enter their pod and to access their data. But if they cancel the app, or if they cancel the usage, or stop the app from accessing anymore, the data stays in their pod, and their pod is accessible. And once a pod has been established, it can be used for multiple apps. So now the data structure is no longer stored in the apps that use and collect it, right? But it's stored in a decentralized manner, but that's owned and controlled by the user. Yeah. So the whole point of this is to decouple, the collector of the data from the owner of the data, aka the user, the person. Yeah. And I really like this idea because one, yes, it gives you more control, more security over data. But two, I think if we can actually flip the script and give people power over their data, they'll be actually incentivized to give more data into this pool, which makes quality of data available to the algorithms more higher quality. And and if we know anything about this, it's like the amount of data is what matters, right? Like the intelligence, the machines, the algorithms can be developed, but they only get better and smarter and stronger and more valuable based off the data sets they have access to. So this movement could actually benefit everybody, machines and the private corporations behind them, as well as the end users, the individuals. I don't see Facebook or Instagram or Google ever pushing this move because their data monopoly is what drives their share price. But my hope is that the new modern web moving forward can adopt this model where it empowers people to to safeguard their own data, to take charge of their own data pool, and they as the intelligence system are just merely accessing it.
Yeah, I hope so too. I think that's one of the challenges now we have with apps getting access to our data everywhere. It's funny. I was just talking. So you probably heard about WhatsApp and all this data sharing, the recent one, and now a lot of people are jumping off the bridge.
Can you break that down a little bit? Because
So WhatsApp is now they're launching an update. In the past, when Facebook acquired WhatsApp, they promised that they will keep them separate. A few years down the road, and $17 billion later, they decided that they're going to actually start sharing the data with Facebook from WhatsApp. So they tell Facebook information about you, who you talk to, your phone number, your location, and things like that, even though you don't have, you never really want to share that data. But they offered an opt-out option. So they said, now we're going to share the data. If you don't want to share your data with Facebook, click here to opt out. And the vast majority of people have opted out. Some people have opted in, but a lot of people opted out. And I said, I don't want my private, WhatsApp is very private. You usually use it with your close friends, your family, etc. You don't want to share that information with Facebook. So just in the last couple of weeks, I don't remember exact date, but WhatsApp has made a new update, which is this time around. They says, now we're going to share your data, and if you don't want us to share that data, uninstall the app. So there is no option to opt out of that data sharing anymore. So Facebook is saying, oh, this was always the case. Yes, this was always the case, but it was an option that you can opt out. Now you don't have that option. And it is unfortunate. So you see a lot of people are now jumping ship to different apps. So now there is, people are moving to Telegram, people are moving to Signal. Ironically, Signal, the founder of Signal is also the founder of WhatsApp, who sold it to Facebook. But that's another story.
I didn't realize. I didn't know that.
Yeah, anyway, so that's funny, but at least he not he or he says now he really cares about privacy and he doesn't want that data to be shared. We don't know. I mean, well, time will tell.
Well, fun
But yeah,
story.
so I mean there's that jump off. So I was having a conversation with a friend of mine last night about, well, I mean it's not really good when I mean there is advantages and disadvantages where everyone is locked into one platform. Remember when everyone was on Windows back in the day, it was easy to have to build software for one platform. When it became multiple platform, it became more difficult. Now you have to make your app different. So this similar way is now we the end users, when WhatsApp collapses and now you have friends that went to all different apps and then these apps don't talk to each other. Um, so now you might have friends on Signal, and then you have friends on Telegram, and then you have friends that still stayed on WhatsApp. So you still have to use WhatsApp if you want to talk to them. So that, I mean, that's one of the challenges. So I was speaking to a friend of mine, and I said, well, I have, and I said, well, it's unfortunate. It's just gonna splinter, and we're not. Would have been nice if all those apps were talking to each other, and um, and the irony is that if you remember, back in the day, that's why SMPP came around, is when MSN Messenger didn't talk to AOL Messenger, and didn't talk to Yahoo Messenger. So the open web developed this MPP messaging platform, so that all these apps communicated with each other. Now all these new mobile apps, WhatsApp and the rest of them, they use the SMPP, but they customize it so they can't talk to each other. So they took the benefit of open web and they ruined it. So
Hmm.
I'm hoping that one day that we go back to the root in SMPP, and then the apps need to talk to each other. You don't really need to have the same app to talk to your friends. You could pick the app of your choice and talk to your friend. So that's one thing. And then he mentioned, oh, there is a common friend that we have, and his name is John Evans. He is a Toronto guy, and he's a software developer, and he's now building a platform that's similar to what you mentioned earlier. It's sort of a GitHub repository of your data, and in a similar way that you keep your data and on GitHub, and then the apps can connect to your database, and then you own it. You tell the app what it can have access to and what it cannot.
Hmm.
And you're right. I don't think Facebook, or because I mean that's the death of Facebook. The main reason why we are on Facebook, and I've been saying I'm leaving Facebook for the last 10 years. I can't, because all my friends are there, all our photos are there, our data is with Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
If I step out of it, I lose all that data that I have and all those connections that I have with my friends that are really living with Facebook, and there is no way for me to get to that. Now, back to your privacy question, um, I am actually, being a developer myself. Like I think people that make sausage, they probably don't eat sausage because they know what goes in the sausage making. So I don't have the Facebook. I've never had the Facebook app installed on my phone for the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years. I've removed it completely once I saw what it actually does, because it really takes a lot more data than you think. It's not only
Mm.
taking the data that you're putting into the app, it's taking all the other situational data from all the other things you do with your phone and stealing it. So that's a big deal for me. So that's why I haven't had Facebook app installed. I only use it in a browser, and 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 even when I browse, when I go to Google, I don't Google anything. Like I use Google as my main search engine, but I always use Google in incognito mode.
Mm-hmm.
And well, not Chrome incognito. I use Firefox
Mm-hmm.
incognito because it really everything you do. I search. Sometimes I want to search, a gift for my wife, and then if I search in the wrong place and it keeps following me everywhere, and then my wife suddenly sees it when I'm browsing the internet and sees like, oh, actually, what is that thing? I want that thing. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, you just ruined the surprise. Like, why
Yeah.
would you put this ad of that thing everywhere I go? So I use incognito quite a bit, and then now I just discovered recently Firefox has something called containers. So
Yeah.
you can put different apps and different websites in different containers, and then that way, Facebook has its own container. I'm not mixing Facebook with anything. It's just Facebook.
Yeah,
That's the only
they
place
can't
where I
see
put it.
what else you're doing in different containers.
Yeah, it doesn't know what else I do. I mean, I'm pretty sure they track you by IP, etc. But at least they will not
At
differentiate
least you
whether
slow
it's
them down.
my children or my wife or who else, right? They don't really follow you that much. So,
Yeah, yeah.
mm,
No, that's really interesting. I think the main touch point you made there is like the collective efforts now that we have to do now to protect ourselves and minimize our exposure. I actually did a detox, a data detox in October. So I did
okay,
Joe
wow,
Rogan's Sober October challenge. So no
okay,
alcohol, no alcohol, no vices, exercise very frequently, but also added into there a social media detox. I actually quit
okay,
all the social apps for the whole
wow,
month. The exception being LinkedIn because that's a professional network, and even then I minimized it. But I deleted I deleted the social media apps. First time I ever deleted them. Right? I never like sometimes I log out, but the first time I deleted the app, and immediately Instagram, which I never got messages from, started emailing me saying, "Hey,
hmm,
this friend messaged you. These 6 friends messaged you.
yeah,
Reply back here." And I know those friends, so I reach out to them, and they're like, "Yeah, we haven't messaged you, all right?"
yeah, wow,
And it's such a powerful feeling, right? That this idea of a notification waiting for that, like there's an update for you, and you're like itching
yeah,
for it. And
yeah,
I'm like, yo, this is weird. And I fought through it. And it's just like any kind of detox, right? Like you have to go through a period of like missing it, weaning yourself off it, and then suddenly it doesn't matter anymore. And then when I came back to, in November, I realized I have no inclination, but I added the apps eventually back into my system, and I was using it, and I still use it a much less frequency than I did before, because now I have a period in my life where I didn't use it. I'm like, oh, it's okay, and the
yeah,
time consumption that I had, the free time went up. But what I didn't like was this the dark UI element of it, right? That's what they call it. So the Facebook, started this idea of like, you have the regular UI, which is called light UI, right? Which is
yeah,
enhancing user behavior, giving you a pleasant user experience, right? All these like positive side things to bring people in. But what these social networks have, especially Facebook has coined, is dark UI, things that prevents you from leaving the experience, things that prevents you from doing a particular thing, like deleting their apps, right?
yeah,
So start triggering you, a whole sequence of events triggers when you try to delete or try to leave the application,
yeah,
and start right from the beginning. So Chamath Palihapitiya is now the founder of Social Capital,
yeah,
crushing it. He was the one who invented and started the growth team at Facebook. So
yeah,
Facebook, back in the day, I think 2008, it was stuck at 60 million users and it couldn't grow. And they went to Chamath and asked him to set up a team specialized on how do we grow this? Like, how do we get more people? Like, we're seen to be hit this
plateau,
ceiling, this plateau, and we can't seem to grow from here. And Chamath, set up all these people, and him and his team did was set up dark profiles. So
yeah,
before you, let's say, you and me, I'm on Facebook, but you're not, right? It would preemptively create a profile on you. It'll scrape the web, find information about you, and then use that to find friends that you might be connected with through some other means, and then preemptively say create a Facebook profile and have friends already lined up because they realize if someone new comes to the network, the reason they had to hit the plateau is a lot of the people who are coming in don't have anybody that's in Facebook to connect to,
yeah, yeah,
right? Or don't know which one to connect to. So
yeah,
if they preload it up, hey, connect to this person based off your interests, based off of things, right?
yeah,
They're more likely to stay. So within the first 6 seconds, if they can show that factor, they stay, they stick on, and they stick on for a very long time. And
yeah,
that is what drove Facebook to the next level, right? The ability to bring in people who already don't have a connection within Facebook. And these kind of principles, this level of thinking, some of the smartest people in the world, Scott Galloway talks about this, right? The Manhattan Project had 350,000 of the top minds working within this closet city to create like the greatest bomb, greatest technology at that time. Modern times now, we have 750,000 of our top minds, top engineers, top scientists, top researchers working within 4 technology firms, right?
yeah,
Facebook, Apple,
yeah,
Google, and Microsoft,
Amazon, yeah,
right? And now Amazon, right?
yeah,
So if if all these minds are now thinking about, okay, how to productize you, the end consumer, how to sell you better, more and more things, how to hack into your, they call it, Tristan Harris, the guy who wrote the Social Dilemma. He talks about the race, the bottom of the brainstem. How do we, from a top down, from an emotional standpoint, how do you grab your attention? How do we drive user behavior? Right, and this is what the topest minds are doing. No longer are the top researchers in universities anymore doing academic research. They're doing user behavior studies for these top firms and how to hack into your subconscious, how to sell you things better. And I think that is the tragedy of our modern age, right? Our intelligence, our factors are all focused towards productizing the consumer, right? And I think the real factor now is how to switch a slip. Like, do we fall into a strategy where it's a paid per use social medias where people pay up front for a premium experience? Do we change the way we interact with data and prove a model where people are, because they own the data structure, that they are willing to give more data, therefore the algorithms can work better in there, right? How do we evolve from there? Do you have any thoughts to this?
Yeah, I think it's more of the latter. I find it very difficult, at least for our generation, where people will go and pay to get access to social network. I don't think that's going to happen, mostly because social network, you need to have a significant mass, and a big percentage of people will not pay for a product like that. But I think it's more of the latter choice that you said. I think it's where we take control over data, and then it will be a positive use of the data. I mean, yes, social network are are just pushing ads and monetization, but it should be more of, if you're looking for something, if you're looking for a product and you find it, that's not really a negative thing. It's a positive thing. You found something that you were looking for. So if you're seeking that information and that information is useful, I think the user should be empowered to do that. And the same thing for a brand. And that's also where we at Tweepsmap, I find actually where we come in handy, is like, if you're trying to, instead of bombarding everyone with an ad about your product, why don't you find the people who really need your product and want your product, and then show it to them, advertise to that group, so that way you have a higher conversion. And then the receiving end is also, they don't despise that. They actually are looking for what you're, or have a high likelihood of looking for the thing that you do. Sort of similar to how Google ads versus Facebook ad. When you're looking for something, let's say you're searching for a software tool, and when Google shows at the top the ads that are relevant to your search, yes, it is ads, it is intrusive, but it's also relevant to your search experience. You are really looking for that thing, and then they're offering suggestions that might help sway your opinion to go to that. So that result, although they're ads, they're actually useful. But when you're on Facebook and you're talking to your friends, and all of a sudden you see an ad of a blender or an ad of a car, I wasn't searching for a car. I wasn't searching for, buy a house. I'm talking to my friends. So that's really, it's more of pushing something to you when you don't really want it. So I think at some point that model is going to have to change and go into more, is what do people want? And that's when you actually come in, and then you as a brand, as a business, that's the point when you want to reach out to these people that are really more relevant to what you're trying to say, not just bombard people with ads, not just force people to be addicted to networks so they can click and continue to see more ads. It's more of, show me the ads that I care about. I would be happy to see ads that I care about. Don't show me about things I don't care about.
Definitely. Perfect. Okay. We have spent an hour talking about this. I think this has been awesome. This has been an interesting episode. I really enjoyed having you on. I really wanted to have someone to really dive into the nuances of social media and the influences it has on our society. I really like the knowledge you bring. Kudos to what you're doing with your analytics engine. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for your time.
Same here. I enjoyed the conversation, and time actually did fly by. So that was a very nice, engaging conversation with you.
Definitely. All right. Thanks everyone who watched, and till next time.